Eleanor Grayson sat in her armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern she'd bought with her late husband, Thomas, 40 years ago. The living room smelled of lavender and old books, a sanctuary of memories where she'd raised 2 children and weathered life's storms. At 75, her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of the letter she held. The insurance company's logo glared at her, a reminder of the policy she'd paid into for decades, believing it was her safety net. Her heart, still strong despite its occasional flutters, thudded with a mix of betrayal and resolve. The words echoed in her mind, sharp as a winter wind, medical burden. That's what her daughter-in-law, Claire, had called her. Eleanor hadn't meant to overhear the conversation. She'd been in the kitchen, slicing apples for a pie, when Claire's voice drifted through the thin walls of the guest house where Eleanor now lived, adjacent to her son Michael's home. "She's a medical burden, Michael," Claire had said, her tone clipped, as if discussing a faulty appliance. "Her hospital visits, her medication sits draining us. We can't keep up." Eleanor's knife had stilled mid-cut, the apple's flesh browning in the air. She'd stood frozen, the sting of those words sinking deeper than any physical pain she'd endured. She'd moved into the guest house 3 years ago, after Thomas's passing, at Michael's insistence. "We want you close, Mom," he'd said, his eyes warm with the love she'd always known. But Claire's patience had worn thin, her sighs growing louder with each doctor's appointment Eleanor needed. The heart condition, the arthritis, the endless prescriptions they were, in Claire's eyes, a ledger of expenses, not a life. Eleanor set the letter down and leaned back, her gaze drifting to the framed photo on the mantel, her and Thomas on their wedding day, young and fearless, promising forever. She'd always been the strong one, the one who balanced budgets, nursed sick children, and kept the family whole. Now, she felt like a shadow, reduced to a line item in her son's household. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Eleanor woke early, the dawn light filtering through the lace curtains. She dressed carefully, choosing her favorite navy cardigan, the one Thomas always said made her eyes look like the sea. She drove to the insurance office, her hands steady on the wheel despite the ache in her joints. The young agent, a man with slick hair and a too bright smile, looked surprised when she announced her decision. "Cancel it," she said, her voice firm. "The whole policy. I don't need it anymore." "But Mrs. Grayson," he stammered, glancing at her file. "This is a comprehensive plan. You've paid into it for years. If you cancel now, you won't get a refund. And with your medical history, I know what I'm doing." She interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not a burden. I'm a person. Cancel it." The agent hesitated, then nodded, processing the paperwork with a reluctant efficiency. Eleanor felt a strange lightness as she left the office, the weight of Claire's words lifting, if only slightly. She wasn't sure what she'd do next. Her savings were modest, her health unpredictable, but for the first time in months, she felt in control. She wasn't just canceling a policy. She was reclaiming her dignity. Back at the guest house, Eleanor began to plan. She'd always been resourceful, a skill honed during lean years when Thomas's teaching salary barely covered the bills. She called her old friend Margaret, who ran a small community center in town. "I want to help," Eleanor said. "I can teach, organize, anything. I'm not ready to sit still." Margaret's voice was warm, unsurprised. "Eleanor, you've got more life in you than most people half your age. Come by tomorrow. We'll find something perfect." That evening, Michael stopped by, his brow furrowed. "Mom, Claire mentioned you seemed upset yesterday. Everything okay? Eleanor smiled. A practiced mask. Just fine. Sweetheart. Just thinking about the future. She didn't mention the canceled policy. Not yet. She wanted to prove something to Claire. To Michael. To herself. She wasn't a burden. She was Eleanor Grayson. And she still had a story to write. The community center was a squat brick building, alive with the chatter of children and the hum of activity. Margaret greeted Eleanor with a hug, her gray curls bouncing as she led her to a small office. We've got a literacy program starting, Margaret said. Adults who never learned to read properly. You were a teacher once. Think you could take it on? Eleanor's heart lifted. Teaching had been her passion before she'd left to raise her family. I'd love to, she said, already imagining lesson plans. The spark in a student's eyes when a word finally clicked. Her first class was a mix of faces, men and women, young and old, each carrying their own shame and hope. There was Javier, a quiet man in his 50s who'd worked construction his whole life, his hands calloused but his eyes eager. And Sarah, a young mother who blushed when she admitted she couldn't read her daughter's bedtime stories. Eleanor approached them with patience, her voice steady as she guided them through letters and sounds. She saw herself in their struggles, their quiet determination. She wasn't just teaching them to read. She was giving them a piece of the freedom she was fighting for herself. At home, Claire's comments grew sharper, though she never said medical burden again. Eleanor noticed the small things, the way Claire sighed when she saw the pharmacy bag on the counter, the pointed questions about doctor visits. Michael, caught in the middle, tried to keep the peace, but Eleanor could see the strain in his eyes. She didn't blame him. He was her boy, always had been. But she couldn't stay silent forever. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Claire brought up the insurance policy. Michael says you went to the insurance office. Eleanor, everything okay with the plan? Eleanor set her fork down, her heart pounding but her voice calm. I canceled it, she said simply. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clink of a glass as Michael set it down too hard. Canceled it. Claire's voice was sharp, her eyes wide. Why would you do that? You need that coverage. I don't need to be anyone's burden, Eleanor said, meeting Claire's gaze. I'll manage. I always have. Michael's face paled, but he said nothing. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, her cheeks flushing. Eleanor stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I'm not helpless, she said, and I'm not done living. She walked back to the guest house, her steps slow but sure. For the first time in years, she felt like the woman who'd built a life from scratch, who'd laughed with Thomas under the stars, who'd never let the world break her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she was still here, still fighting, still Eleanor. The days that followed were a quiet rebellion. Eleanor threw herself into the literacy program, her mornings filled with lesson plans and her afternoons with the soft victories of her students' progress. Javier, the construction worker, beamed when he read his first full sentence. A simple, I am strong, that carried more weight than its words. Sarah's eyes welled up when she sounded out a children's book for her daughter, her voice trembling with pride. Eleanor felt a spark reignite within her, a purpose that had lain dormant too long. Teaching wasn't just a job. It was her way of proving she still had something to give. At home, the tension was palpable. Claire avoided her, her usual chatter replaced by curt nods and quick exits. Michael tried to bridge the gap, bringing Eleanor coffee in the mornings or asking about her day. But his questions felt cautious, as if he feared what she might say. Eleanor didn't push him. She knew he was torn, caught between his wife's pragmatism and his mother's pride. But she couldn't unhear Claire's words, and she couldn't undo her decision. Canceling the insurance policy had been a gamble, but it was hers to make. Eleanor began to explore other ways to secure her future. She met with a financial advisor, a kind woman named Linda who listened without judgment. "You've got options," Linda said, spreading out spreadsheets. "Your savings aren't lavish, but they're enough to cover basics if you're careful. And there are programs Medicare, local assistance. You don't have to do this alone." Eleanor nodded, but the word assistance stung. She'd always been the one to help, not the one to need it. Still, she took the brochures, promising to read them. At night, she pored over the numbers, her calculator clicking as she mapped out a new plan. She'd sell some of Thomas's old books, rare editions he'd collected over the years. She'd cut back on non-essentials, maybe even move to a smaller place if it came to that. The guest house was comfortable, but it was Claire's domain, a constant reminder of her precarious place. One afternoon, as Eleanor prepared for her literacy class, Margaret pulled her aside. "There's a grant we're applying for," she said, her eyes bright. "To expand the program. I'd like you to lead it. Eleanor, you've got a gift for this." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I'm up for that. Margaret, I'm just getting started again." "You're more than up for it," Margaret said firmly. "You're giving these people hope. That's no small thing." The idea took root, growing stronger with each class. Eleanor began to dream bigger, imagining a program that could reach more people, maybe even offer tutoring for children too. She spent her evenings sketching out ideas, her energy renewed. But the guest house felt smaller each day, the air thick with unspoken words. Claire's silence was louder than her complaints had ever been, and Eleanor knew a confrontation was coming. It arrived on a rainy Thursday, as Eleanor sat in the main house's kitchen, helping her grandson, Tommy, with his homework. At 8 years old, Tommy was a bright spot in her life, his laughter a balm for her wounds. Claire walked in, her face tight. "Eleanor, we need to talk." Eleanor sent Tommy to his room, her heart sinking. "What's on your mind, Claire?" Claire crossed her arms, her voice low but sharp. "Canceling the insurance was reckless. You know how expensive your care is. Michael's stressed out of his mind, and now we're supposed to figure out how to cover you." Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her voice steady. "I've been covering myself my whole life. Claire, I didn't ask for your help." "You're living in our guest house," Claire snapped. "You're eating our food. You think that's not help?" The words hit like a slap, but Eleanor didn't flinch. "I've paid my way," she said, "and I'll keep paying it. I'm not your burden." Claire's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway, his face weary. "Enough," he said. "Both of you." "Mom, Claire's just worried." "And Claire, Mom's trying. Can we not do this?" Eleanor stood, her knees aching but her resolve firm. "I'll make my own way," she said, looking at them both. "I always have." Back in the guest house, she sat at her small desk, the rain pattering against the window. She pulled out a notebook and began writing a letter not to Claire or Michael, but to herself. A reminder of who she was, who she'd always been. "You are Eleanor Grayson," she wrote. "You've faced harder things than this. You will not break." The literacy program became her anchor. She met with Margaret to discuss the grant, outlining a vision for classes that could serve the whole community. She spent hours researching, calling local organizations for partnerships, her mind alive with possibilities. Her students noticed the change, their trust in her growing with each lesson. Javier brought her a small wooden carving, a thank you for helping him write a letter to his son. Sarah invited her to dinner, a simple meal that felt like a celebration. But at home, the rift widened. Claire stopped inviting her to family dinners, and Michael's visits grew shorter. Eleanor felt the loss, but she refused to let it define her. She began looking at apartments in town, small places she could afford with her savings and the income from the literacy program. The idea of leaving the guest house was daunting, but it was also freeing. She wasn't running away. She was choosing herself. One evening, as she packed up her teaching materials, her phone rang. It was Linda, the financial advisor. "Eleanor, I found a program that could help with your medications. It's not much, but it's a start." Eleanor smiled, a flicker of hope warming her chest. "Thank you, Linda. I'll take a look." She hung up, her eyes falling on the photo of her and Thomas. "We're not done yet, love," she whispered. "Not even close." Eleanor's days settled into a rhythm, each one a small act of defiance against the label Claire had pinned on her. The literacy program was thriving, with new students joining and word spreading through the community. Eleanor's classes were more than lessons. They were a lifeline, not just for her students, but for her. She found herself laughing more, her voice stronger as she guided her students through the alphabet or celebrated their first paragraphs. The work was exhausting, but it filled her with a purpose she hadn't felt since Thomas was alive. At the community center, Margaret became her confidant, sensing the weight Eleanor carried without needing to ask. One afternoon, as they sorted books for a donation drive, Margaret set down a stack and looked at her. "You're different these days, Eleanor. Stronger. What's driving you?" Eleanor hesitated, then told her about Claire's words, the canceled policy, the tension at home. Margaret listened, her face softening with understanding. "You're not a burden," she said. "You're a force. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." The words stayed with Eleanor, a shield against the doubts that crept in at night. She began to take concrete steps toward independence. She visited a small apartment complex near the community center, a modest building with a sunny courtyard. The rent was manageable, especially if the grant for the literacy program came through. She filled out the application, her hand steady as she signed her name. It wasn't just a lease. It was a declaration. At home, the silence between her and Claire grew heavier, a wall neither seemed willing to breach. Michael tried to keep things light, bringing Tommy over to share stories about school, but Eleanor could see the strain in his eyes. She wanted to tell him everything, how Claire's words had cut her, how she was rebuilding her life, but she held back. He was her son, but he was also Claire's husband, and she wouldn't force him to choose. One evening, as Eleanor prepared for a class, Tommy burst into the guest house, his face lit with excitement. "Grandma, I got an A on my book report," he said, waving a paper covered in red stars. Eleanor hugged him, her heart swelling. "That's my boy," she said, ruffling his hair. "Tell me all about it." As Tommy chattered, Claire appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Tommy, it's time for dinner," she said, her voice clipped. Then, to Eleanor, "We're eating early tonight. You're welcome to join." Eleanor met her gaze, searching for sincerity. "Thank you, Claire," she said, "but I've got plans." Claire's lips tightened, but she nodded and left with Tommy. Eleanor watched them go, a pang in her chest. She loved her family, but she couldn't keep living in their shadow. She packed her teaching bag and headed to the community center, her steps lighter with each block. The grant proposal was coming together, and Eleanor threw herself into it, working late with Margaret to refine the details. They envisioned a program that could offer not just literacy, but life skills budgeting, job training, even art classes. Eleanor saw herself in every part of it, her years of experience as a teacher and a mother shaping her vision. The community center buzzed with possibility, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt like she was building something that could last. But the past wasn't done with her. One morning, as she sorted through old papers, she found a letter from Thomas, written during a hospital stay years ago. "Eleanor, you're my rock," he'd written. "No matter what comes, you'll carry us through." She traced the words, her eyes stinging. She'd carried so much for so long, but now she needed to carry herself. She called Linda, the financial advisor, to follow up on the medication program. "It's approved," Linda said, her voice bright. "It'll cover most of your prescriptions. And there's a local clinic with sliding scale fees. You're going to be okay, Eleanor." The relief was overwhelming, but it came with a new resolve. Eleanor began selling Thomas's books, carefully selecting buyers who'd value them. Each sale was a small step toward financial freedom, a way to fund her move without relying on Michael or Claire. She didn't tell them about the apartment application. Not yet. She wanted to stand on her own before sharing the news. At the community center, her students continued to surprise her. Javier wrote a letter to his estranged daughter, his hands shaking as he read it aloud in class. Sarah brought her daughter to a session, the little girl clapping as her mother read a story. Eleanor felt a pride that went beyond words, a sense that she was part of something bigger than herself. But the tension at home reached a breaking point. One evening, as Eleanor returned from the community center, Claire was waiting in the guest house, her arms crossed. "Michael's worried sick about you," she said. "Canceling the insurance. Taking on all this work not thinking about what this does to him." Eleanor set her bag down, her voice calm but firm. "I'm thinking about myself, Claire. For once, I've spent my life taking care of others. Now I'm taking care of me." Claire's eyes narrowed. "And what happens when you can't? When you're back in the hospital, and we're stuck with the bills?" Eleanor felt the sting, but didn't waver. "I'll manage," she said. "I'm not your responsibility." Claire left without another word, the door slamming behind her. Eleanor sank into her armchair, her heart heavy, but her spirit unbroken. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for the right to be seen, not as a burden, but as a woman with a life still worth living. The community center became Eleanor's refuge, a place where she wasn't defined by her age or her ailments. The grant proposal was submitted, and Margaret was optimistic. "If this comes through," she said, "we'll have funding for 2 years. You could make this program your legacy, Eleanor." The word legacy lingered in Eleanor's mind. She'd never thought of herself that way, but the idea felt right. She wasn't just teaching people to read. She was helping them reclaim their voices, just as she was reclaiming hers. She spent her days preparing lessons, meeting with students, and planning for the future. Her evenings were quieter, spent in the guest house with her books and her thoughts. But even those moments felt purposeful. She began packing for the move, sorting through decades of memories. She kept the essentials photos, Thomas's favorite scarf, a few cherished books, but let go of what she didn't need. Each box was a step toward independence, a reminder that she was more than the sum of her struggles. The apartment application was approved, and she signed the lease, her heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. It was a small space, but it was hers. Michael noticed the boxes one evening when he stopped by. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. his voice tight with worry. Eleanor took a deep breath. Her hand steady. I'm moving out. Michael. I found an apartment. It's time. His face fell. A mix of shock and guilt. You don't have to do that. This is your home. It's your home, she said gently. And Claire's. I need my own space. I need to be me again. Michael's eyes glistened. But he nodded. I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. She hugged him. Her heart aching but full. You don't need to be sorry. Just let me do this my way. The move was set for the end of the month, and Eleanor threw herself into preparations. She sold more of Thomas's books, the proceeds covering her first month's rent and a few necessities. She met with Linda to finalize the medication program, grateful for the safety net it provided. Her health was still a challenge. Her heart condition required regular checkups, and her arthritis flared in the cold, but she felt stronger, as if purpose had bolstered her body as much as her spirit. At the community center, the literacy program continued to grow. Eleanor started a new class for teenagers, kids who'd fallen through the cracks of the school system. They were tough, guarded, but she saw the same hunger in their eyes that she'd seen in Javier and Sarah. She approached them with the same patience, the same belief in their potential. One boy, Marcus, who'd barely spoken at first, began staying after class to talk about books. You make this stuff make sense, he told her, his voice shy but sincere. Eleanor's heart swelled. She was making a difference, not just for her students, but for herself. She wasn't a burden. She was a teacher, a mentor, a woman with a purpose. But the rift with Claire remained. Eleanor tried to keep things civil, inviting Tommy over for cookies and stories. But Claire's coldness was a constant reminder of their divide. One afternoon, as Eleanor packed, Claire appeared in the guest house, her expression softer than usual. I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire said, her voice low. I was frustrated. The bills. The stress, it's a lot. Eleanor nodded, her hand stilling on a box. I know it's a lot, but I'm not your problem to solve, Claire. I'm handling it. Claire's eyes flickered with something like regret. Michael loves you. Tommy loves you. I don't want you to feel like you have to leave. I'm not leaving because I feel unwanted, Eleanor said. I'm leaving because I want to live. Claire didn't respond, but she stayed for a moment, watching as Eleanor packed. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet. But it was a start. The day of the move came quickly. Michael helped load her boxes into a small rental truck, his silence heavy but supportive. Tommy clung to her, his eyes wide. You'll still read to me, right, Grandma? Every chance I get, she promised, kissing his forehead. The apartment was small but bright, with a view of the courtyard where flowers bloomed even in the late fall. Eleanor unpacked slowly, savoring the act of making the space her own. She hung the photo of her and Thomas on the wall, a reminder of the life they'd built and the strength she still carried. That evening, she sat at her new table, a cup of tea in her hands, and wrote in her notebook. This is home, she wrote. Not because of the walls, but because I chose it. The community center called the next day with news. The grant had been approved. Eleanor's vision for the literacy program would become a reality, with funding for new classes and resources. She celebrated with Margaret, their laughter echoing through the center. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Eleanor's new life took shape in the small apartment, each day a testament to her resilience. The literacy program expanded, with new classes filling the community center's schedule. Eleanor hired 2 part-time assistants, both former students, to help manage the growing demand. Javier took on a mentoring role, helping new students with the same patience Eleanor had shown him. Sarah started a book club for parents, her confidence blooming. Eleanor watched it all with a quiet pride, knowing she'd built something that would outlast her. Her health remained a challenge, but she managed it with the same determination she brought to everything else. The medication program covered most of her costs, and the local clinic was a short walk from her apartment. She scheduled her appointments carefully, refusing to let her condition define her. She was Eleanor Grayson, teacher, survivor, woman. Michael visited often, bringing Tommy and sometimes a homemade meal. Their conversations were easier now, free of the tension that had hung over the guest house. He didn't talk about Claire much, but Eleanor sensed he was working through his own struggles. She didn't press. She'd learned that love meant giving space as much as giving time. Claire, too, began to soften. One afternoon, she showed up at the apartment with a potted plant, a peace offering. "I was wrong," she said, her voice halting. "I didn't see you." "Eleanor." "Not really. I'm sorry." Eleanor took the plant, her eyes meeting Claire's. "Thank you," she said simply. "Let's move forward." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was enough. They started small coffee together, a shared laugh over Tommy's latest antics. Eleanor didn't need Claire's approval, but she welcomed the chance to rebuild. Family, she knew, was worth fighting for, even if it looked different now. The literacy program became a cornerstone of the community. Local businesses donated supplies, and the mayor even stopped by to commend Eleanor's work. She was invited to speak at a regional conference, her story of resilience inspiring others. She stood at the podium, her voice steady, and told the audience about her students, about the power of second chances. She didn't mention Claire's words or the canceled policy, but they were there, woven into every word she spoke. At home, Eleanor's apartment became a gathering place. Students dropped by with small gifts, a handwritten note, a batch of cookies, each one a reminder of the lives she'd touched. She hosted a small party for her students, the tiny living room filled with laughter and stories. Javier read a poem he'd written, his voice strong. Sarah brought her daughter, who proudly read a page from her favorite book. Eleanor watched, her heart full, knowing this was her legacy. One evening, Michael called with news. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "I want to help with the program. Maybe sponsor a scholarship or something. For kids like Tommy." Eleanor smiled, her eyes misting. "That'd be wonderful. Michael, let's talk about it." The idea grew into a scholarship fund for young readers, named after Thomas. Eleanor worked with Michael to set it up, their bond strengthening with each step. Claire even offered to help with fundraising, her practical mind a surprising asset. It wasn't perfect, but it was family, and Eleanor cherished it. Her health took a turn one winter morning, a sharp pain in her chest sending her to the clinic. The doctor adjusted her medications, warning her to slow down. But Eleanor couldn't stop. Not now. She delegated more to her assistants, but she refused to give up her classes. "I'm not done yet," she told the doctor, her voice firm. She kept teaching, kept building, kept living. Her apartment was filled with small tokens of her new life student drawings. A quilt from Margaret, a photo of her and Tommy reading together. She wrote in her notebook each night, chronicling her journey. "I am not a burden," she wrote. "I am a beginning." The community center threw a celebration for the program's one-year anniversary, and Eleanor was the guest of honor. Her students spoke, their words a testament to her impact. Javier called her a hero. Sarah called her a second mother. Eleanor stood, her hands trembling but her heart steady. "And thank them. You've saved me as much as I've helped you," she said, her voice breaking. "We're in this together." As the crowd applauded, Eleanor felt Thomas's presence, a warmth that had never left her. She was still here, still fighting, still Eleanor. And she wasn't done yet. The seasons changed, and Eleanor's life settled into a new normal. The literacy program was a beacon in the community, with waiting lists for classes and partnerships with local schools. Eleanor trained more teachers, passing on her methods and her passion. She was no longer just a participant. She was a leader, her name synonymous with hope and resilience. Her relationship with Claire evolved slowly. They weren't close, but they were civil, even warm at times. Claire joined the Scholarship Funds Board, her organizational skills helping it grow. They didn't talk about the past, but Eleanor felt a quiet understanding growing between them. Michael was the bridge, his love for both women unwavering. Tommy remained the heart of it all, his visits to Eleanor's apartment filled with stories and laughter. Eleanor's health was a constant negotiation. She had good days and bad, but she managed with the clinic's help and her own stubborn will. She walked to the community center each morning, her steps slower but her spirit undimmed. Her students were her fuel, their progress a reminder of why she kept going. Marcus, the shy teenager, won a local writing contest, dedicating his poem to her. Sarah published a short story in a community newsletter. Javier reunited with his daughter, their letters a bridge Eleanor had helped build. One spring morning, as Eleanor prepared for a class, she received a letter from the insurance company. A new policy option, tailored for seniors, with affordable premiums. She considered it, her fingers tracing the paper. She didn't need it the way she once thought she did. But she wasn't foolish. She called Linda, discussing the details, and enrolled. It wasn't about dependence. It was about pragmatism, about living on her terms. The scholarship fund grew, with Michael and Claire hosting a fundraiser that brought in enough to support 10 students. Eleanor spoke at the event, her voice strong as she shared her vision for a community where no one was left behind. The crowd applauded, but it was Tommy's hug afterward that meant the most. "You're the best, Grandma," he said, his eyes bright. Eleanor's apartment was her sanctuary, filled with the life she'd built. She hung student artwork on the walls, each piece a story of triumph. She kept writing in her notebook, her words a map of her journey. "I am enough," she wrote one night, the pen steady in her hand. "I always was." The literacy program's second anniversary was a community event, with music and speeches and a crowd that spilled into the courtyard. Eleanor stood at the podium, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She spoke of her students, of their courage, of the power of words to change lives. She spoke of her own journey, not in detail, but in spirit, her voice carrying the weight of her choices. As she stepped down, Margaret hugged her, tears in her eyes. "You've done it, Eleanor. You've made a difference." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. "We've done it," she said. "All of us." That night, she sat in her armchair, the one she'd brought from the guest house, and looked at the photo of her and Thomas. "We did it, love," she whispered. "We're still here." Eleanor Grayson was 76 now, her body frilier, but her spirit fierce. She wasn't a burden, never had been. She was a woman who'd faced betrayal and chosen to rise, who'd turned pain into purpose. Her story wasn't over, not by a long shot. She had classes to teach, lives to touch, a legacy to build. And she would, one word at a time.